You're listening to Inspired Caring, episode number 95. In this episode, I interview Paul Madsen, the author of Men Grieve Too. It's a book he wrote to help men rebuild their life after the death of a loved one. Paul lost his wife and then his adult daughter only 9 months apart. And in this touching interview, he shares some of the experiences that he's been through on his journey to heal. Hello, welcome to Inspired Caring. I'm your host, Michelle Magner. If you are caring for an older family member, this is the podcast for you. Each week, I bring insight, tips, inspiration, and strategies to help you care for the people that you love without losing yourself along the way. Having cared for both of my grandmothers, I've helped manage everything from hospital stays, households full of belongings, to navigating senior living and end-of-life care. And I've worked in senior living as a result of that experience, serving my residents and their families as they've been on this journey too. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy this episode of Inspired Caring. We have Endless Journey in common. I am on the committee that's helping plan the gala, so I've been going to the office and meeting with them. And last year I went and it was beautiful. And then they have my husband's grandma too.
Well, I am so honored to be the keynote for that event. It's a true stepping stone in my speaking career. I was chatting with a friend of mine who's a widow. Just the other day, we were talking about finding our purpose in life, our new purpose. Mm-hmm. And she said she hadn't found hers yet and was, continuing to pray about it and so on. And I said, well, don't, do the butterfly thing, sit and let it land on you. Don't chase it and all that. Mm-hmm. And she was saying, oh, yours is so clear. You found your purpose and your calling so quickly. My wife's been gone almost 2 years and my daughter nearly 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I told her I said, no, I have been working on developing this kind of thing for decades, literally. And just lately, life threw me the wrinkle of what my topic is. And I earned it the hard way. But I have a topic.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I'm not sorry.
No, not sorry. And it's deeply emotional and it's universal.
Well, that's what I found. I mean, I tell, and that's a segue into why I wrote the book. I'll throw that in. I had the double whammy. I lost my wife and daughter 9 months apart. My daughter was 31, almost 32 years old, and I'd been married for 40 years. And due to that double whammy, I call it, I went deep on grief support groups because I just thought I should and would and could and needed them. And one time I was at the mortuary at their monthly support group, and I had just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time after the meeting. And a lady who I call Marge because I don't know her real name, she's probably in her 60s or 70s. And she came up to me, and I had said something during the meeting that triggered something. That's why she came up to me. And then she talked to me and went on and on and basically lost it emotionally about her loss of her husband, who died apart from her. She at their cabin far away from Omaha. And she was beating herself up about the fact that she should have been with him, and she felt like she could have saved him, which was obviously not true. Died really, really quickly. And just went through all that early grief emotion thing and just let it all hang out there, and crying, and gave me a huge hug afterwards. And I'm saying, I'm at this grief group for me. I'm here for my needs, and but my loss was a little longer ago than her loss. But then when she thanked me, and I didn't really do anything but stand there and listen, and which is what was important. I said, that felt really good. That felt really good to help somebody else, and she really appreciated and needed somebody at that moment to bring that in. And I said, I want to do more of that. And maybe I'd written a couple other books, and I said, maybe I'll write a book about grief. And so I went to my computer at home and looked at good old Amazon and looked at her grief books. And you know what I'm going to say? About 3,500 titles.
Okay. So a couple had been written on it.
The world does not need another book on grief. There's just plenty of them out there, and they all kind of say the same thing sometimes. Anyway, so I kind of put that away. And then another time at a different grief group, I'm looking around the room, and there's, at this one, there was probably about 21, 22 women and 5 guys. And I go, as you can tell, I have no problem speaking my mind, but, some of these guys were pretty bottled up, and I'm also wondering, why are there so few men here? And I went on to research that, and of course that eventually led to Men Grieve Too. And there's just, I narrowed it down. I said I want to help other people with their grief, and then I think men is a good subset of that, because I'm a man, and so on. So that's kind of how it got born.
Wow. And that's you pointed out men in the meeting seemed bottled up.
A little bit. There's one guy I know, he came, and he's a kind of a speaker for his industry. So he's got no problem communicating. But he came to the meeting and he said, I'm not saying one word for the first 3 meetings. And this one was a grief share. You've heard of that? This one was a 13-week session. And he just planned on the front end, I'm not going to say a word. And, not because he's a man, just because, well, maybe it is, it's all that conditioning, societal stuff and all that. And he just listened. And that's completely fine at the meetings, to be able to just listen. That's encouraged. In fact, if you don't want to talk, you just pass to the next person. But it's I think guys of my generation and older, grew up, our dads, our coaches, our uncles, kind of had that John Wayne mentality. John Wayne, actor from 30, 40 years of military, cowboy, fight, and rub some dirt on it, and suffer pilgrim, and don't like saying much at all, and just known for his toughness and all that. And so we kind of grew up with that, or he kind of, I don't know if he resembled society or society resembled him, but you know what I'm saying. Men tend to be a little bit more emotionally unavailable. Have you seen that?
In my life, or
well, even in your work. When you get down to the caregiving thing that you're about,
typically it's
men detach a little bit from that, or not?
Yes, for sure. No, typically it's a woman, a wife, a daughter that is doing the caregiving. If it's even in a marriage, maybe it's the man's mother or father, and the wife tends to be the one to jump in and
well, we could debate forever back to the cavemen and women about, all the provider and cave thing and all that stuff, and genetics and caregiving and nurture versus nature and all those kind of things. But, some of those things affect us even today. And so I see that out there. And I in my book, I mentioned that I talk about traumatic stress syndrome and all that. And post-traumatic stress syndrome, and the guys and gals coming home from the Middle East wars, Iraq and Afghanistan and such, they're younger, they're in their 30s and 20s, and they didn't necessarily grow up with John Wayne or that John Wayne mentality, and they seem to be a little more open, don't you think?
I feel like culturally we are trending to a more, I guess there's that term metrosexual,
Yeah.
where a
I haven't
guy
heard that
is
word in a
more
while, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
open to this idea of expressing emotion. I think women are stepping into their own strength and power. We're finding kind of, I loved your level on the front of your book. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
we're finding some balance with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what's so confusing about grief is the grief journey. And what I have heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the 7 steps of grief were specifically written for people who had passed away from a cancer diagnosis. There was something about it that was tied to a really specific thing, but grief feels much more fluid and encompassing.
Sure. Well,
So,
in case one of your listeners hasn't heard about it, you're referring to the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 5 phases of death. I'm sorry, 5 phases of grief
yeah.
story, and that was written, I think, in the 60s, 1960s. And she actually wrote it when she had cancer and she was dying. Now, obviously, wrote it before she died, but and that became, I think, that was kind of one of the first studies or books or content about grief and the whole concept of it. And somehow society glommed onto that and said, okay, my first step of grief is going to be, is it denial, the first one or whatever? I can't remember. And she has 5 things: denial, acceptance, anger, depression, and I'm forgetting one other.
Maybe acceptance.
Yeah, did I say that? Doesn't matter. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's the 5 phases there, and what has come under fire within the last, I don't know, several years of, not fire, but just further study, is that that somehow told people that they had to grieve like this. You start, okay, I'm going to deny that my wife has died. I'm going to just put it out of my life, and I'm going to sweep it under the rug. I call that sweepers in my book. Men are sweeping all the feeling up under the rug instead of acknowledging it. And, that's what she would call denial. Well, in her, what was assigned to her, whether she intended it or not, was that, okay, after I'm done with my denial, then I'll go to my anger.
Mm-hmm.
And so for somehow that society was thinking, okay, you go through this phase, then you go through this phase, then you go through this phase, and your word nailed it. And Michelle, you said fluid. Grief is more fluid than that, and yeah, I mean that's a perfect word for it, because there is no roadmap. There is no right way to do it for men or women.
And I think just hearing that gives us a sense of, I'll speak for myself, gives me a sense of peace. And maybe permission is a word that I'm looking for.
Perfect.
Because I never know how it's going to show up for me on any given day. We had 5 people, 4 of which were family members, pass away in a year's time frame.
Wow.
And this is like within the last year. My husband's father just passed away last February, and then my aunt passed, and then my cousin passed unexpectedly, and then his grandmother passed. And prior to that, I had a good friend who unexpectedly died.
Wow.
And then presently, his mother's on hospice, and he has an uncle who is a nearing end of life. So we're just swirled up. And like
life is transition, isn't it?
It is a transition.
But how does that?
Life.
Yeah, you're talking about how peaceful that is for you to know it's fluid and there's no one right way.
Right. And I think to not feel like there's a stage I have to get through to achieve
Absolutely.
a higher rung. Maybe we were making dinner on a Sunday, and I had poured, it gets me teary. I had poured olive oil and balsamic in a little plate, put the Parmesan in there, and I'm dipping bread. And I was like, oh God, Raj would have loved this.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm just like losing it.
Of course, there's all those triggers. Yeah. And I talk about it in a book too. I talk about tears moments, and tears
Yeah.
is an acronym which I won't go through all of, but
Mm.
T is triggers, and that, that's old news in the grief world. Everybody knows about triggers. For me, triggers are kind of an ongoing mystery. I mean, I obviously, I was a caregiver and for 4 years for my wife, and grocery shopping, manage the house, blah blah blah, and and she always liked avocados, and I
Mm.
was never a big fan of the raw, fresh avocado, even though they're very healthy, I guess. And
Or so
anyway,
they
so I always
say.
made sure to buy avocados, and when she passed, and I'm grocery shopping, well, I don't buy them for myself, but I stopped in front of the avocado stand and bent over and cried in my cart more than once, and I'm sure the people in the store thought I was having a heart attack or something, but that is a huge trigger. And
Yeah.
and even though I don't stop and cry on my cart anymore when I see the avocado, think about it every time. And it's just that way with triggers. And how long before that goes away? Well, after almost 2 years, I still think about I don't know that spin cycle of avocados, but I don't cry each time, but I think about it. But so when you're in your familiar zone, um, those triggers obviously hit you, but they become less and less over time in most cases. The thing I noticed, the point of this whole story is that when you're going through your daily routine. Oh, we ate restaurant at that restaurant. Oh, that was a clinic I took her to. Oh, this, oh, that. Just the drive through town is makes you crazy.
Mhm.
But then I took a trip in October, and that got me out of my routine. And I immediately there experiencing new things, new sights, found myself, I got to go home and tell Lisa about this. I got to go tell Lisa about this. And Lisa had been gone for a year and a half. And, even though I'd stopped doing that about my daily routine about Omaha, driving around town or whatever,
Mhm.
or avocados in the store, I thought about it from this trip because there's new triggers, new adventures, new things. So with that many people you've lost, your life is going to be full of triggers, Michelle, for quite a while.
Yes. And it's a balance when I'm in a space where my mission and purpose is to help family caregivers, and I'm really tapping into those losses to use as fuel to serve and help as many people as possible.
That's good. That's great because sometimes I feel like, oh, you're Paul, you're I don't know what the word, exploiting the deaths of your wife and your daughter here. You're writing a book, and people pay you for that, and people pay you to speak on the stage. And um, you know, I back off that, and yes, those things are true. Um, but a friend of mine called it a calling.
Yeah.
Speaking especially to men, not only to them, but especially to them, and helping them with and through their grief. And so that, and my new angle of it is, I don't want to be known as the grief guy. How depressing is that? And so my new angle, and the one I'm going to go with as a keynote speaker at Endless Journeys Gala is from grief to gratitude. And so
Mm.
that's where I'm headed, and I think that's where we all need to head. And that's, I go back to the level guy here, the level thing. And so
Yes.
in my book, I call that final stage, and Ross might call it acceptance. I call it keepers, and that's where you're keeping the essence of their life as part of yours. Of course, a part of you, a part of you, part of me is you that will never die. And
Right.
so that's a Lady Gaga phrase that I like, actually. And the point is that the keeper is I use little tools as analogies to each section of my weepers, sheepers, leapers, and keepers, the types of things that men go through.
Yeah.
And on the keeper end, the tool, and it's not really a tool, I use the idea of varnish. And that's
Mm.
where you have if you worked in a wood shop before and created a small wood, say footstool, like I did in high school shop.
Mhm.
You sand and fix and cut and assemble and all that. What's the final stage? You put some varnish on it and make it,
Right.
it changes it. It prepares it. It finalizes it. Not that we're ever done finalizing our grief, anything like that. But it's just that final finished view type of thing. So anyway,
No, I
just
love that. And I think one of the things that people are searching for are, how do I take all of these pieces of my grief and the journey and the experiences and then build something and create something? Because, that first phase for me and many people I know is like, you're just trying to catch your breath.
right.
And once you feel like your head is a little bit above water and you're starting to see some sunshine, but you're trying to figure out how to operate in the world without them. Like, what am I supposed to do next?
Oh yeah. Well, that whole identity thing. I mean, we were I met my wife. I was 20 years old. She was 18 years old,
Mm.
and so we were not fully functioning formed adults. We're just old adolescents at that point. And you go for 40 years and you have the kids and buy the house and have the bills and all that stuff. And,
Yeah.
it's your identity. It's who you are. And all of a sudden, that's not all of a sudden, but then it's not there.
Mhm.
And, oh, great. Anyway, the point is that you have to figure out who you are. And that's kind of why I like going to these grief groups, is that we're a like-minded group of people. Everybody's lost somebody. And I've got new friends, lots of new friends there. And,
Mhm.
so I can relate to them, number one. Number two, these are new identity. They're all looking for new friends too. So,
Right.
it's just it becomes a social event, actually.
One of my dear friends, her mother has been going regularly to a grief group the last 18 months since her father passed away. And they have become such good friends, this group, that they're traveling together and they're
Oh, wow.
having these life adventures now
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
So do you
Well,
think that's part of the formula, is kind of doing something different, like
Well,
going to a group,
it
or?
depends on, yeah, I mean, in in the book I talk about leapers. Those just what you think, that's the guy who um, changes most everything right away. You know,
Oh,
example I put out there, a woman told me about her father who lost her mother, and the guy got married 3 months afterwards, remarried. Like, he would be a leaper. He's leaping
mhm,
into it. Are you masking your grief? At that point, I'm saying yes, because
mm,
I'm much further out than that, and not that I'm anybody to look up to, but the point is that what are you covering up? What are you doing? And so, yes, the change thing, which you talk about, is something I think we all have to manage, because when you're in that state, you don't think straight at all, and so you do need to be careful. But what you talk about the travelers, and you said you just need to do something, and that's the absolute formula I found. I'll tell you about a
mhm.
guy I know whose name is Don. He was married even longer than I was, I think 50 years. Lost his wife. I think I don't know how old he is, but older than me. But you should see the guy. He's a joyful guy. I see him all the time at the grief groups. Joyful guy. He became an ombudsman for a nursing home
Oh
people.
my gosh.
Oh, and so he's got to be 75, and
I think I know who you're talking about.
probably
Yeah.
know. Yeah, yeah, he probably do. And he goes out and there's a guy at a nursing home and he can't get the right wheelchair, and Don goes in there, and you should see the joy. It almost gives me goosebumps that Don has helping this guy out as an ombudsman for him at a nursing home. And that's the kind of thing he would never have probably done if he was married and staying home and watching the Wheel of Fortune or whatever.
Hmm.
But now he's got
Yeah.
this whole new life, and he's just what you said. He's doing something, as far as traveling and new companions, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
And a juicy one, and what I need like to talk about. But
She's on Instagram. Her pictures are spectacular.
oh wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and and what I've been told is that a lot of people don't want to get remarried, but they do want companionship.
Mhm.
And so, what's wrong? I mean, they're all grown ups, and find someone who has similar interests and enjoy it together. Go for it. And
Right.
I mean, I do know people who say, I lost my spouse, and that was the love of my life, my soulmate. And in my book, Men Grieve Too, what I do is I mention, and I'm no expert, but I say there's over 7 billion people in the world. You're telling me that that person you happen to meet lived across the hall in the apartment, or you went to school with, or college with, or high school with, is the only person in the world you'll ever be close to again?
Mm.
I just, I'm in my 60s. I hope to live another 30 years, and I'm kind of sad if I think I'll never have another relationship like that again. I mean, of course it won't be the same. I had all my firsts with Lisa.
Right.
My first kids, my first house, my first everything, and that will never be repeated. And I'm not going to try to repeat it. I'm
Right.
going to try to create new things. I'm going to jump in the RV with, like, your friend or whatever, however they travel, and experience new things that way. So
it sounds like there's just an openness and curiosity and just being willing to try things, explore, and to hold yourself along the way, that I can be grieving and do these things.
Well, perfect segue to one thing I mentioned whenever I talk with people individually, even. Her name is Colleen. She lost her husband, and she wrote not a published book, but just an assembly of pages and jottings and stuff. And that's the first place I read it. And she says, grief is always with you. You just get used to it.
Mm.
And I just think that covers so much ground, don't you, Michelle?
I do think it does. I feel like I still my mind wants to put it on a scale, though. Right? Like the rawness, the freshness, the tears at the avocado stand, at the grocery store, and that there's some mobility with it, that it's always there, but it's somehow softer, and it may trigger up. But there's an adaptability that we have with grief.
Yeah. Well, I've heard it. I just heard last week about another extreme, about a guy who lost his wife, and 6 years ago, I've not met the guy. I just heard a story, so who knows how much of it's true. But 6 years ago, lost his wife. Still keeps her car registered. Still has her clothes. This would be a person who was stuck in his grief. But as you say, the human soul, the human spirit is adaptable. It is strong. I've seen lots of progress in these people that I go to grief groups with. I've seen progress in myself. I don't have to stop at the avocado stand anymore.
Right.
And not that it's not important, but it's just, we do adapt, and we always carry it with us. Sharon Zender wrote a book called Crosswords for Grief, and she worked at Hebe Hoffman, Devorah Cutler Funeral Home for many years in their aftercare, and she led those Sunday night classes. And one time she had a great visual for this. She had a big, huge suitcase. I don't know if it was filled with rocks or what, but something pretty heavy. And then she had a medium-sized tote bag, which had some weight to it as well. And then she had a purse size thing, which had some weight to it, but was smaller. And she had 3 people carry those items around the room. And the guy that got the suitcase, he could hardly budge it. It was super heavy. And with the analogy, the story, and it's just like, at the end, the gal who had the purse-like thing, manageable, almost like a normal purse, she was moving and she could walk around, but it was there, right?
Right.
And her point just beautifully illustrates that, grief is always with you, but you get used to it.
Right.
I just love that story.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. It's like another what's coming to my mind is when you ask someone to hold a cup of water, and it's not how much the cup weighs, it's how long you're trying to hold it for.
Right. Right.
That's exhausting. And I think part of what it is time. I think time is really confusing. And an example of that would be if I put on a song that you jammed out to in high school, you're taken back, right? And I think when we have these grief experiences, time is going on, marching on, and you start to lose track sometimes because you're just motoring through your day. I coached this woman, and in our first consult call, we worked together for 3 months. First consult call, she kept referring to the fact that she was a widow. And well, because I'm a widow and I'm a widow. And ultimately I asked, well, when did your loved one pass away? And her husband had passed away 14 years prior.
Wow.
And so she was just very, very stuck and attached to the story about being a widow. And I used the word story, I think judiciously, carefully, but like just very attached to being a widow. And so it really just informed all her decisions throughout her day. So I don't know, just what are your thoughts on time and the passage of time?
Yeah. Well, your story about her brings up a couple things. One of them is that I think that some people, and it's especially evident during the early raw phases of grief, the victim thing, especially those poor people who lost a child in a car wreck or something like that. And I met a couple in their 30s who lost a 14 and a 16-year-old, the same car wreck. Can you imagine the trauma? Not one, but two at one wreck. Just is so, they didn't represent themselves as victims in any way. They were very amazing. But the point is that some people, I think men sometimes even more so, harbor that I'm a victim, maybe even God is punishing me, all these kind of things. And I'm not a psychologist. I cannot tell you what fuels a victim mentality, but some people do that. I've seen it with some things as simple as divorce.
Right.
My son and I have a joke about someone we both know who's on Facebook, and it says status, it says divorced, I think in all caps, and she's been divorced for about 12 years. Like, let it go.
Wow.
And that's kind of remind me of your friend or your connection who had the widow for 14 years. What labels do we assign to ourselves? Am I a victim? Some people like wearing that victim hat sometimes. And so I don't think that's healthy. I'm not going to say I've never done it, but there's that. The second thing is that, and again, I'm going above my education level here when I talk about this, the idea of that grief, I've read this, could give you a little endorphin shot. By reliving that grief, I met a woman in my grief group, and she can go full on to tears in like 2 seconds. And her husband's been gone over a year now. And, I'm not saying she's doing that on purpose to give herself that neurological kick, but people, I think, should be aware of that. That's possible, that in the absence of something else, grief is love that doesn't have anywhere to go. In the absence of something else, maybe they're living on that just a little too much. So maybe the victim thing, or maybe the whole endorphin type kick I get when I revisit all that, or adrenaline. I'm not sure what the hormonal thing is, but you know what I mean? Have you ever seen anything like that?
Well, and just, thinking through back to that woman who had been a widowed for 14 years, she was unaware that she had mentioned it literally 6 or 8 times in a 45-minute span. And so just that
You pointed
awareness
out to her?
alone, pardon?
Did you point it out to her?
Of course, because that was the baseline of our working together in the coaching. And by the end of our time together, she felt like she had a new lease on life because
That
she
is so
felt
exciting.
very stuck.
That's a goosebump story, Michelle. That's awesome.
It really is. And she felt like through the work and our conversations and the coaching, she was able to come into some present day awareness. But really, it took some processing. And there's just, again, time is very fluid. There's no timeline. I really don't want people to get this idea that we are assigning how long anyone should be. It's just having an awareness of yourself and where are you at and what do you need?
Right.
Because if you are needing something different, then it's worth exploring what that might look like.
Right. Well, your story reminds me of a woman I met at a grief group, and I don't know, I'll call her Susan. That's not her name, but she was at my table one night and been married for 51 years. And her husband had a fairly rapid demise, but there was a period where he was in the hospital for some very critical days there at the end. And she's married happily, and I could just tell she was a wonderful wife, I'm sure, for all those years. And she lost him like 3 years ago, and she was still coming to the grief group, and I think she was seeking some kind of I don't know what, but she was carrying this guilt 3 years ago, carrying this guilt about she's the consummate hostess. She's of the age group where you're the Emily Post, Emily whatever,
yes,
perfect etiquette person, the ultimate hostess and all that. Well, when all these family members came to the hospital, she's out there giving them all comfort, talking to them, keeping them informed just outside the hospital room. And her husband did die, and I don't know if she was with him or not. That's not the point of the story. But she felt tremendous guilt after 3 years that she wasn't spending more time and attention on him. Instead, she was out doing this hostess thing. And I could just see it was like it was that heavy suitcase thing with her.
right.
And I said, Susie, I said, you gave 51 years of your life and your kids and your grandkids of a great life to your husband, and don't let 51 minutes that you maybe made a mistake ruin the rest of your life.
Right.
And
who's to say it's a
could
mistake?
literally
right?
see her
Yeah.
sit up straighter.
Yeah.
That was so rewarding. This is why I go to these grief groups.
Yes.
And that's not so much for my benefit anymore, although they all help, but it's hopefully maybe I can help somebody else.
Right. And the bottom line is death is permanent and we never feel like we have enough time, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, even with my 96-year-old grandmothers, who it was a slower decline, and it's just so final.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
It's so final. And I really wish, I just want to offer people that we get to choose our thoughts that we're having about things. So what if someone said you're no longer allowed to feel that emotion of guilt tied back to this situation or your loved one's
Well,
passing?
there's that I'm working on a second little devotional type book, reflections of grief type of thing. And I have, it's very short little verses. It says, people tell me that I've grieved enough or long enough. People tell me that I should move on. And what they don't realize is that you're never going to move on.
Right.
This is part of who you are. Grief is always with you. You just get used to it. And so, you know, it's none of their darn business.
Right.
Everyone's grief journey is unique, even to the guy who's still registering his wife's car for 6 years.
Right.
I don't think that's really healthy, but it's who he is, and he has to come to his own terms. And it's really the my little motto for my Hallmark card is, especially for instance, there's friends of mine had a grandson die in a tractor accident, age 22 or something like that. I mean, just starting his life and just starting his farming and all this exciting stuff for him. Just got married, and I told his mother, I says, we're not here to answer why. We're just here to help you cry.
Mm. That's so beautiful.
And I just think that helps kind of summarize everything, because so many people think they have to say the right thing, right?
Right.
I mean, in those 5 deaths, I mean, what percentage of the people who talked to you said the wrong thing?
I mean, I think eventually people just stop talking.
Well, and that's it too. It's safer.
It's safer, and it's sort of like, wow, I don't even know what to say.
Well, and and they don't have to say.
Right.
When I was writing the book, I said I better eat my own dog food here, and I brought unannounced, unplanned lunch to 2 different widows at my church who had lost their husbands more recently than I lost my wife. And I'm not trying to brag about it. That's no big deal. The point is, do something unannounced, unplanned. I mean, to call people and organize food to bring over and all that stuff, or when are you there? What can we, the killer question, what can I do for you? Don't ask that. Just do something. I brought them lunch. You should have seen the joy that they have. They see me at church, they just, and I just love it. It's such a simple little thing. And these are women in their 80s. They're not spontaneous creatures. But do they care? No, and so just do something, like, hey, Paul, we're going golfing as a threesome, not a foursome, on Sunday at 3:00 at this course. You want to join us? Hell yes.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Be spontaneous, be willing to invite.
Because I call it the calm after the storm in my book. You've seen it with all the deaths that you've had. I mean, all the activity, all the relatives come, all the food, all the gifts, all the people hanging out, and then that slowly tapers off, doesn't it? And then everybody goes back to their normal routine. Well, Paul's probably okay. He looks okay, and I'm not asking for help, and that's not the point. The point is, surprise people. I won the grief lottery. I had so many friends, relatives, neighbors, strangers. I mean, somebody sent a China angel after Laura died to my house anonymously, and it was just amazing. And I don't know who they are. Thank you, whoever you are. And just stuff like that. I won the grief lottery. Eventually, people go back to their own lives, which is fine and normal. Do it. That's what we all do. I went back to my normal life almost, but just out of the blue now and then, do something just to let them know that, you're thinking about. There's that whole stigma, the 3rd wheel, 5th wheel thing and all that, which I don't know if you want to go into that or not, but it just, yeah, people need to not ignore the grieving. And I'm not saying people ignore me. I'm just saying, if you have a chance and think about it, if you would have gone to a movie with Paul and Lisa, you would have gone golfing with Paul and Lisa. Well, and again, I'm just so blessed because I did, and I continue to win the grief lottery. Not that I want to. It's not the lottery I want to win.
Right. Well, and Well, so to that point, I'm just from a place of, I don't know. I'm just going to ask, like, you have had more than your share in a very short time span with your wife and a child. And I think that sometimes people have thoughts and potentially judgments about grief based on if it's the age of the person or the role or the connection that they have. And did your grief feel different with your wife than it did with your child?
It is different. And I mean, it's heresy perhaps to call my daughter a soulmate. I mean, but we were joined. I mean, this was a bipolar child who was very high maintenance. So I'm not saying this is Dick Van Dyke and the white picket fence and all this. Far from it. Police visited our house more than once. But anyway, the point is that her whatever, acorn didn't drop very far from the tree or whatever. We just loved to just sit and get into it and talk and laugh. And we had so many similar inside jokes. And that, I miss that. And I still find stuff around the house from her, and I anyway, there's triggers there too. But she did not live with us for the last 2 years. She lived with her fiance, and so she was going about her adult life, even though she was tethered to oxygen 24/7. But and so there's that progression in life that the children move up and move on and that kind of thing. So that was good. And then COVID, we didn't see him as much as we wanted to, of course. But with my wife, she's my wife. She's my soulmate. I probably pester the heck out of my good friends via text because I'm seeking that constant diatribe of inside jokes. And I guess I had that with both of them. So they're similar to both. But again, Laura had moved out, and so it was just Lisa. But I don't know. It is different because there's more history, obviously, with Lisa. But really, there's only about 10 more years of history there because we had Laura then. I have felt that it's different before. We always knew Laura was short for this world because of her many health issues, but it's still shocking when it actually happens. But we have the benefit, if you will, of a prolonged thing there. So there was not a surprise. We're able to communicate, say goodbyes. She was a very spiritual person. Her credo was not more than this body, and more than this mind. And if there's ever anybody who was ready to go in the world, it was her. And that was fairly peaceful, with Lisa. I mean, she was ill for many years, but I had more anger about that. So I think then, like, why did this have to happen this way? And so they were different that way.
Yeah.
Thanks for being my psychiatrist.
Well, I'm listening. Yeah. And I know that there are people that are listening to this podcast that have lost their child. And I know there are people who have lost parents and.
Well, again, I compare my story with her. I mean, pretty much got to say goodbye, and all that. And again, she was very ready. And she as people will see at the Endless Journey banquet, she tried to inspire other people. I'll show that video. And so I feel for those. I know several people who lost children in automobile accidents and such, or even hunting accident, and and I feel sorry for them because they didn't have what I had, and so hence my thoughts from grief to gratitude.
Yeah. I'm so grateful for this time with you.
Well, and me.
Thank you.
Me also for my time with you, Michelle. You're a kind soul, a kindred soul, and I think you'll just do nothing but succeed because your work is not about money or fame or anything. It's about service. And I can just tell that about you when I met you in person and today as well.
Thank you very, very much. And there's no shortage of people out there who need both of us. They need us both to keep showing up.
It's part of the circle of life. It really is.
That's right.
And
yeah.
You know, I love Endless Journey's name. I have to ask Melanie how she came up with that name. Do you know?
Last year at the gala, she shared it's because love literally never ends.
Okay.
It's an endless, our love is an endless journey. So
perfect.
As I remember it, that is what she had shared. Yeah.
Michelle, thank you so much for this opportunity. People are telling me that Men Grieve Too is helpful to them, and
great.
For that, I am grateful, and I'm glad to get to know you better and look forward to our future conversations.
You as well. And I will put a link to purchase. Is it on Amazon?
The book? Yeah, you bet.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll put a link in the show notes so people can just click and get it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.